what I also want to make sure I acknowledge and on the same page as you is that people should not feel ashamed. Parents should not feel like they're in some weird category because they have vaccine questions.
Yeah.
And I say this so wholeheartedly, but we cannot keep grouping vaccine hesitancy with anti vaccine. They're not the same.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Birth Lounge podcast. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, or shall I say the big baby in the womb. Providers love to throw around this phrase, big baby. We think you're gonna have a big baby. Wow, this is a big baby in there. We should schedule your induction because this is a big baby. And you know what? Honestly, it's a great sales tactic because it works. It freaks you out. You start thinking, oh my God, what if this baby's huge? How am I going to ever push a big baby out? But here's the truth. A suspected big baby is actually one of the worst predictors in maternity care. If we actually break down the numbers, only 1% of babies in the U.S. are actually 9 pounds and 15 ounces, which constitutes a big baby, which means the rest of the 99% of babies that are born in the U.S. are below 915, which means they don't actually meet the criteria for a big baby. So why are you told so much about a big baby? Well, partly because money, like everything, and partly because scheduling an induction or a C-section is easier for the hospital system. And then partly, yes, we're going thirds here, your OBGYN is probably afraid of a big baby. You want another piece of data that may drop your jaw to the absolute floor? The biggest predictor of whether you are able to push out a big baby or not is actually your provider's belief in your ability to do so. Yeah, so the doctor you choose, they're quite important. You want a doctor that is not scared of a big baby, rather knows how to facilitate the birth of a big baby. But what if you don't have that? What if you can't change providers? What if you are too late to maybe go to a different hospital? What if you just don't want to? Then what? Well, lucky for you, I've been working on a brand new course that I'm calling Pushing Out Your Big Ass Baby. And it's going to bust through all the myths, lay out all the real evidence, link all the data for you, and hand you the exact advocacy tools that you need to shut down the scare tactics with confidence. Right now, we are in a pre-sale phase, which means you are getting a pre-sale price. If you have been worried about hearing the words big baby, if your provider has been scaring you about having a big baby, or you're just concerned that you may not know what to do if you run into this in the end of pregnancy, and you're looking for tangible tips to overcome the fear-based rhetoric and actually have the birth of your dreams no matter how much your baby weighs at birth, then this course is for you. I'm going to be defining exactly what microsomia is, whether or not induction and C-section are evidence-based for a quote-unquote big baby, how movement in labor and birth positions make all the difference, the actual risks that are involved because nothing is risk-free, plus we're going to talk about some complications that may arise and how you can handle those, and then finally I'm going to teach you how to advocate for yourself so that you do not get pressured into a birth situation that you absolutely do not want. Head to thebirthlounge.com/bigbaby to get your hands on this brand new course today. Now, right now in the pre-sale period, you will get access to the course, but all of the course content is going to be released on October 15th. Do not wait. The price goes up on November 1st, so get in right now in this pre-sale period so you can take advantage of that pre-sale price. I cannot wait to help you have an empowered birth and push out your big ass baby. Again, that is thebirthlounge.com/bigbaby. See you there. Now, one of the most overwhelming conversations that parents are having these days is about vaccinations. Should I? Shouldn't I? Should we delay? Should we do an alternative schedule? Are they safe? Have they even been studied? What are the clinical trials like? Why aren't we looking at vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids? And why in the world do we not have a clinical trial that looks at today's vaccines versus a placebo saline injection? These are questions that land in my inbox every single day, multiple times a day. And I want to let you know that I'm really proud of you for asking these questions. I know that you're asking them because you genuinely want to make the best decision for your baby and your pregnancy and for your family. And I think you're really wise to be questioning these things. You know me, I'm all about autonomy. I don't think that you should blindly follow anybody. I think one of the best things that we can do are research all of the decisions that you make. I mean, heck, you're talking about somebody that I researched mattresses for about 6 months before I actually broke down and bought the one that I wanted. Your health care is way more important than any mattress, and it totally doesn't come with an exchange policy. So these questions that you're asking, they are really important ones. I'm really excited to be being joined by Dr. Alok Patel, who is a board-certified pediatrician on faculty at Stanford Children's Health, where he works as a pediatric hospitalist, taking care of everything from premature babies to adults and running into all sorts of medical conditions, from the routine to the bizarre to the outright rare. He also serves as the department head of strategic communication because his passions outside of the hospital really revolve around journalism, on-air broadcasts, and consulting in both the digital health world and communications. Oh, and one of the most fun facts about him is that he's actually a national medical contributor for ABC News. He has his own show. It's called Patel It Like It Is. And he's been featured on other media platforms like CNN, PBS, and NBC. Dr. Patel really embodies this spirit of bringing humanness back to medicine. And I tell him as much in the episode. He's so down to earth. He's laid back. He keeps it real. He's not in any way trying to push his personal beliefs or hospital policies on you. He simply just has transparent conversations with you as parents to help you understand what are your options, what's the data suggest, what are his clinical recommendations, although this obviously is not medical advice in this episode. Remember, he is a doctor, but he's not your doctor. And then he leaves it up to you. He just says, I want you to feel safe. I want you to know that you can come to me with the questions that other people may not be willing to talk about. And you're totally going to feel that in today's episode. I think if all physicians and healthcare providers had the attitude and the spirit of Dr. Patel, that we would be able to turn around the mistrust that has been created between consumers and the healthcare system almost overnight. This was such a refreshing conversation, and I want you to really come to it with an open idea, even if you are either anti vax or vaccine hesitant. And if you're pro vaccine, get ready to completely nod your head off. You're just going to be nodding yes from the start to the absolute finish of this episode. Dr. Alok Patel is one of the coolest dudes I've ever met, and it is genuinely such an honor to have him on the show. So, without further ado, Dr. Patel, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, HeHe.
I honestly, the honor is mine. You've no idea how much I admire you and I respect you, and I love your vibe. I think you are one of the most human physicians out there. Not to say that everyone's not a human, but you really bring that feel of, hey guys, I'm just like you. I'm just helping you make decisions that feel best to you, and I want you to be informed and confident in those decisions. And I love that so much. I think a lot of that humanness has been lost in medicine, and it's something that I really strive to bring back. So thanks for being here. And, I'm really excited for this conversation. We talked briefly before we started recording that there's so much misinformation out there on
So
the
much.
internet. Oh my God, so much. And, it's actually very scary. I am pregnant right now with my first baby, and I felt so confident.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I felt so confident going into this, and I felt like, all right, I know what I want. I know exactly what we're going to do. I know about vaccinations. And the deeper you get into it, I actually think that it is more confusing than anything, because you have people who, with so much vigor and confidence, say these very scary things, and you're like, oh, crap, what if that's true? I just want to make the best decision. And then you look at the data and it's this, but then you have people who are questioning the data and saying, look at the funding, and you're like, yeah, that does look a little fishy, but like, how do I actually know? And so I think a good place for us to start is, can you break down the science behind the CDC and the AAP's recommendations and why our vaccination schedule is what it is?
Loaded question, and I love it. Let's jump into it. Foremost, thank you for recognizing that I'm not a cyborg and that, I am not an AI-powered robot talking to people, because I think humanism is extremely important in medicine. Like as healthcare professionals, one of the greatest, most daunting responsibilities I always say is that we talk to people. I talk to new parents on the best days of their lives and the worst days of their lives, depending on the situation. You just got to be real with it. And like, at the end of the day, it's not about throwing textbook figures and data at people. It's about having a human connection. And I feel like when we talk about topics like vaccines, like anything that's a contentious topic, sometimes that gets lost. Vaccines, there's no place for politicization in healthcare access and preventative tools like vaccines. But I think there's a massive place to ask questions, especially because there's a lot of people out there who are like, wait a minute, as you mentioned, like people are hearing 1,000 different opinions. And at some point you get lost, because one thing about misinformation is repetition actually starts to mess with your mind and you start to lose track of what's real versus not. After my little preamble, I will tell you, like, if you look at the vaccine schedule, I do think that people have forgotten that the American Academy of Pediatrics has put out recommended vaccines since the 30s,
Okay.
since way back in the day. So somehow recently, the vaccine schedule has come under scrutiny by the current administration, by wellness influencers, by people who are curious, but it's been around for a very long time. And the people right now who remember some of these diseases, like polio and diphtheria, are the elderly. These people who were school children in the 40s and 50s. And my older mentors are like, oh my gosh, you should have seen what things were like in the 70s when we had babies dying of these diseases, like Haemophilus influenza B, pneumococcal meningitis, kids getting encephalitis from measles, for example. And so you look at the schedule, the science behind it is based on, first of all, if the vaccine is even available. And so as these vaccines, from the measles vaccine in the mid 60s to, getting vaccines later on, like more recent vaccines like HPV and varicella, when those vaccines are going through development, first of all, we have to be like, okay, do we even need this vaccine? Is this disease causing a problem? And it's not just about life or death. Is this causing a lot of illness, acute illness, missed school, long-term potential for disability? Once you come up with the idea with the vaccine, then there goes this massive, rigorous set of clinical trials. We got to make sure the thing is safe. We got to make sure it works. We have to make sure also that the benefit outweighs the risk of the vaccine. And so you might have this amazing tool to go and kill a virus, like drinking bleach. But guess what? It's probably going to hurt your body too. So you got
Yeah.
to make sure that the vaccine is not doing that. This is why these trials are so incredibly important. And when parents look at that schedule, if you go online right now and you look at the CDC childhood vaccine schedule, you should know how much time and research went into each one of those vaccines. And then you brought up ACIP, the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices. This has also been around since the 60s. And so I know people on ACIP. This is an independent group of experts who looks at the data, they argue about it, they go back and forth, they present all these facts and figures, and at the end of their meetings, they even have Q&A so people can chime in. And the reason I want to bring all this up is people should also look at the vaccine schedule and realize that these vaccines, the schedule, the dosing, the age, it's all been debated. And yes, right now you have people in the government, RFK Jr., for example, and people who work in the MAHA movement who have questioned, they're like, why aren't these vaccines questioned? Why aren't people talking about the schedule? And I'm like, they are. They have been for over 50 years.
Wow.
If anyone in the country had watched an ACIP meeting in the past several decades, you would know that this is debated. And, I'm giving you a long answer here, but I think what happened was there were questions about the COVID-19 vaccine and the pandemic response. And that kind of conflated all the trust in vaccines for some individuals. But before I stop running my mouth, I will say it is important to note that the majority, the overwhelming majority of parents still support vaccines. They're still getting their kids fully vaccinated. The overwhelming majority of people still trust science and healthcare professionals. It's just that the minority who peddle misinformation tend to be louder.
Yeah, I do want to recognize, COVID was a scary time. And I do think that we got this vaccine and then we
Of
learned
course.
about all the cardiomyopathy that happened. And I think, I don't want to, I think, dismiss that people felt rattled by that because it was a scary time to say, okay, we were told this was 100% safe and now we had all of these heart conditions come from it. That certainly was gonna rattle some people,
Yeah.
don't you think?
Of course. And I don't want to cut you off, but let's get into it.
Yeah, go for it. I would love to hear your thoughts. That's my thought is I understand where the hesitancy comes from and I definitely understand why that shook people up is we were led to believe it was totally safe and I do think there was maybe some room to say this is what we have now. We've got to use it. We have to get ourselves out of this pandemic. This is the data that we have now. We obviously just started this pandemic. We don't have 10 years of study because we haven't been in a pandemic for 10 years, but this is our way forward. And I think for some people, they really latched onto the idea of now we have cardiomyopathy. And it's like, yes, we were also in a really bad pandemic.
Yes. So you said a lot there, and and it's all completely valid. And the way you were speaking with that humility and saying, I don't know, is probably what we should have done more of in the
Sure.
beginning of the pandemic. There was a lot of, and again, there was some political pressure for
Mm,
people to quote, solve it. We remember how much Trump celebrated Operation Warp Speed, and rightfully, that was an incredible effort to get
okay.
a vaccine to the forefront. And then all of a sudden, people now are questioning the whole thing. And you have those looking back on it now and saying, well, hey, maybe we rushed the vaccine. And you ask yourself, is that based on data or is that based on some type of political pressure, some social pressure? So, kind of going backwards, like I do think that there were some communication issues in the very beginning of vaccine development during the pandemic. And I'm not even talking about the other restrictions because we can get into a whole debate
Sure.
about whether or not schools should have been closed. I
Sure.
firmly believe that schools should have been opened way sooner.
Wow. Yeah.
And the way that everything got conflated and pediatricians started to get blamed for school closures, I got death threats because people said my kids aren't in
Wow.
school because of you. And I'm like,
Uh,
hold up. Do you want me to show you the letter that a bunch of pediatricians penned to reopen schools? It was not us. We
Mm,
wanted children in schools. Some children, that's where they found their safety, their nutrition, their social
totally.
support. Anyway, don't get me started. But now going back to vaccines, in the very beginning, there should have been, and we tried to explain to people what an mRNA vaccine was. But all it took were a couple people online to spread these myths about mRNA vaccines controlling your body or mutating your DNA, that the COVID-19 vaccine had microchips in them, that all these things that were just outright not true. mRNA exists in every single cell in our body. It's there, and it does not mutate your DNA.
And the technology is old. It's not, we didn't
Thank you.
create it in 2020.
The
It's been
technology has been
around.
around for almost 30 years.
Yeah.
mRNA technology is also going to be, it should be that our path forward for a lot more vaccines in the future. HIV, malaria, even ways to target heart disease,
Wow.
autoimmune disease, even cancer. Again, so this conversation got muddled, and I want to bring up what you mentioned, technically myocarditis, so inflammation of heart
Got
tissue.
it. Okay.
And so the minute a few of these cases came out, people rightfully got really concerned and said, "Oh my gosh, what's going on here?" There's two things to mention about that. Number one, those cases came out because of the vaccine safety monitoring system. So people out there who are like, "Oh my gosh, the CDC doesn't care. Pediatricians don't care." I'm like, "Who do you think caught this?" It
Mm.
was the monitoring system that caught this. This is why these systems were designed. This is why VAERS, the vaccine adverse event reporting system, this is why it was created. So if anyone gets a vaccine for themselves or their child, like COVID-19, and then something happens and they're concerned, report it, it gets looked into. So VAERS is not a gotcha moment to pediatricians. We look at VAERS. Everyone relax. And so when those cases came out, immediately everyone stopped. We looked at data. We immediately looked to see what population was most affected. What we eventually found was, mostly after the second mRNA vaccine in teen and young adult males, they had a higher chance. And what no one paid attention to on the other side of the science fence is that the actual rate of getting myocarditis from the virus itself was 7, 8, 9, 10 times higher
Then the vaccine.
than a vaccine. And so you're looking at this rare event versus we know it's a worse situation from the actual virus. But again, when this all was coming out, we were talking about it, we had already lost the communication misinformation campaign. It was already out there. And now you have people who are talking about ivermectin and other treatments and making tons of money, which is ironic to me because they accuse doctors of making money off the mRNA vaccine. And I'm like, you are making so much money off telehealth visits, misinformation, and whatever treatment you're promoting. And the last thing I'll add with, which again, this is proof to people that mRNA vaccine communication was so mired in misinformation, is many individuals, and I don't want to name names, but many individuals who outright question vaccine safety on a public stage for mainstream news networks, for popular cable news networks, on popular podcasts, all themselves got the vaccine. Just want to say that. There were people working for companies that mandated the vaccine. They went and got the shot. They got their families a shot, and then they went online to talk SHIT about the shot. And I'm like, all right, dude.
Why do you think that was? Money?
Money and the followers you got. I sincerely
Mm.
think that is. Again, I want to make sure I'm clear about this. We should question the schedule of the mRNA vaccine. People have the right to say, is this safe? You reported myocarditis. Whoa, what's going on? Should I now not give this to my kid? What's the data to prove that my healthy children need this? Like, those are all valid questions. We should
Totally.
be asking those. When there was a concern about blood clots from Johnson and Johnson, that shot, it was
Totally.
paused. It was paused because that's what we should do. But on the flip side, people simultaneously should have paid attention to those who were making a lot of money and getting tons of followers online by going against the grain. They were touted as being these iconoclasts, like, oh my gosh, this person is speaking out, what a hero. And I'm like, yeah, they're a rich hero, just so you know.
A famous hero now.
Famous hero. Yeah, I need to calm down. I'm getting heated.
And this episode isn't even about COVID. We could spend hours talking
Oh,
about
well,
it.
there's a listen. There's an analogy between what happened in COVID and what's currently happening.
Totally. And what you said is true is like that was the tipping point. Before that, we obviously had people who were questioning vaccines, but I think that one really was so in our face that we there was room for more transparent
Of
conversation
course,
and more
absolutely.
space for us to say, listen, we're not sure. This is what we have at this
Hmm.
time. This is our offering to you. This is the data that we have. This is the safety trials that we have done. It is
And
what it
people
is.
could have gotten that if they watched ACIP meetings.
Okay, so when you say that the ASIP is independent, who chooses these people? Are you applying? Are they appointed? How is ASIP put together?
Historically, HHS appoints them, and then they appoint them, and then they apply, and they have to go through this rigorous review process. And they try to get a good representation of different backgrounds, epidemiology, pediatrics, infectious disease, and so forth.
And are members of ASIP paid?
No.
It's totally voluntary.
Voluntary expert independent panel.
Yeah. Okay.
They have to disclose their financial interests. And so again, when you hear RFK and others mentioning, oh, these people had really terrible financial interests, that was all disclosed. That since ACIP came to fruition, it's been disclosed.
What would be the problem of saying that you couldn't have any financial conflict of interest at all? If you'd like to sit on ASIP, then you actually need to give up any other conflict of interest, at least for the time that you are being on that board.
I don't think there's a problem with that. I think you in medicine we are very transparent about financial interests. ACIP is, anyone to an elected position is. If I go and give a lecture
Yeah.
to 10 people, I disclose my financial interests if I have any. Now, oftentimes in medicine, we say no financial interests, but for real, we should be transparent about that. And but what I'm going to say is, and so do all of you. If
Hmm.
you were listening to this podcast right now and you're like, doctors get paid by pharma, ask your politicians who they get paid by. Ask the wellness influencers how much they're making. That's all I got to say. There is a reason why, you can look up anything that a doctor might be taking from a side hustle, and we're very transparent about it, and that somehow no one wants to ask questions about the $6 trillion wellness industry and the super PAC funded politicians.
Yeah, it's the lobbyists that get me that are just like, wow. When you start to go down that rabbit hole, it will make your head spin. Okay, bringing it back to childhood vaccines. How does our vaccine schedule in the US compare to other countries? And what are our, I guess, sickness rates look like? How are we doing comparatively globally?
It's hard to compare it to other countries because there are different vaccination schedules all over the place.
Okay.
And for the most part, and I can include some links and diagrams here. For the most part, we are covering the same vaccines across the world, especially among developed countries.
Okay.
And we have the same vaccines you see that are being available in the United States are they're available everywhere. And where this got even more illuminating for some people is that there are vaccine mandates all over the world also.
I did not know that.
There are only a few countries that don't have vaccine mandates, and even countries, again, I don't know the specifics here, but even countries like India, where my family's from, may not have a specific federal mandate for school age children, but it's recommended, and you can actually get a penalty if you don't do it. And so, anyway, long story short, vaccine mandates are all over the country, all over the world, all 50 states until Florida revoked some of those mandates. And yes, we have a slightly different schedule. That is something that should be questioned. Yeah, if people have questions about that, ask about it. Say, why do they do things differently in, Japan versus Europe versus America versus Latin America? So in developed countries, we have very low rates of certain vaccine preventable illnesses in developed countries. This is the important thing I want to say. So if you look at rates of diphtheria, tetanus, polio, Haemophilus influenza B, pneumococcal meningitis or pneumococcal disease, measles, mumps, rubella, all these diseases have drastically dropped in developed countries in the past several decades.
Okay.
It is all because of vaccines. They've truly dropped. Now, Someone might say to me, it's because of hygiene. It's because we have become better at cleaning up our streets and our sewage system. And yes, I'm going to be completely transparent. Better sanitation throughout the last century has also greatly improved our health and may have helped also bring down the rates of some of these diseases. Now, here's my rebuttal to that. Even in countries that don't have great hygiene, that don't have great sewage, they've gone to nearly zero polio cases because of the vaccine. Great example would be India. So we're doing great, relatively, if you look at the rates of these preventable illnesses. But again, the last thing we want to do is open the door for them to come back. And we live in a different time than we did in the 60s, where polio and MMR and Haemophilus influenza being these diseases I could rattle over and over again, they're just a flight away. You could absolutely get new cases. We eradicated measles in the year 2000, and look at us now. We've
Mm.
got 3 deaths in a pediatric population this year. Can you imagine what would happen, hypothetically, if we had a death in one child from Red 40? There would be a
Mm.
riot in the street.
So, where is polio present? Like, where could someone hypothetically go on vacation and bring back polio?
There's polio cases off the top of my head in Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Oh, got it.
Well, I believe that's where they're still endemic, meaning where they still have cases that are circulating throughout.
Mm.
But in Pakistan, Afghanistan are the two countries at the top of my head that still have endemic transmission. So
Mm.
it's still being spread amongst people.
Yeah.
Endemic meaning that it's not brought in by traveler cases. So we are on the cusp of having endemic measles, by the way, because
Yeah.
we will have continuous spread for one year, we lose our status. And so polio is one example of how travelers could potentially pass it around because there are still cases throughout the world. They're not necessarily endemic.
There because you travel one place and then it
You
gets
travel one place, somebody else travels another place. You
totally.
find it every now and then, it shows up in wastewater.
Oof.
And in
Okay.
some individuals, they may not have those classic horrifying symptoms of polio that we've read about and learned about, including paralysis. But again, you think about what could happen if you let it spread, if people just stop covering for it. What would happen in subsequent generations in developed countries? Could we theoretically get polio back here? Yes, you could. Highly
So
contagious, you could.
is that what you have to say to people who say polio is not in the US, so I'm not going to vaccinate against it because what's the threat? Is that kind of the idea? Is like it's not because you have an immediate threat, it's because if anything happened and polio made its way back like measles, then we'd have a big problem because no one would be inoculated against it.
That's exactly right. There's two important things to bring up there is number one, it is about protecting this entire generation.
Okay.
And we're not trying to start dipping below on these rates because of what could happen as a domino effect, but also the reminder that vaccines do protect the individual, but it is about protecting community. Like it very much so is about protecting everyone. So if someone says to me, like, hey, I'm not vaccinating my kid. And why do you care if you vaccinate your kid? Because vaccines are safe and effective. Like you should not worry about me. And I said, okay, a harsh take, but I worry about all children, but I worry about the community effect and for the people who can't get vaccines, young infants or people with compromised immune systems. I will tell you, with polio is a really interesting example of vaccines being so effective that people are no longer afraid or even aware of the diseases that they're preventing. People are not afraid of polio. In the March for Science in New York City in 2018, a bunch of people got together, we lobby for science. I had a sign and I was walking around. My sign said, I'm a doctor. I see a lot of things, but I've never seen a case of polio or smallpox. Vaccines work. And people are like cheering, like having fun with it, whatever. And this woman comes up to me, and I'm not trying to judge her at all, but she seemed like she was older but phenomenally charismatic woman. She comes up to me, she's like, hey, can I talk to you about your sign? I was a schoolgirl in the 50s. And I remember children getting sick and leaving the classroom and not coming back.
Oof.
And I remember one of my really good friends getting sick and all of a sudden he couldn't walk anymore. And then I remember when we got the polio vaccine and the level of hope we all had, and she started getting teary eyed. It had been, it had been what, like almost 60 years almost 70 years since this whole incident had happened, and she was still getting teary-eyed. And she's just the thought that you could get sick and then this could happen to you when we were in elementary school was horrifying. And then this vaccine came out, and she's like, you guys don't even know what polio is.
That's harrowing. It's also really wild to think that you, as a doctor, are alive today. You've never seen a case, and then just 50 years ago, 60 years ago, someone's still alive. I think when I think about something being eradicated, I think about people who lived a long time ago, like all those people are dead. And it's like, no, they're still very much alive.
Mhm.
Remember what the world was like when polio was rampant and running through the schoolyard.
Oh, for sure. And okay, so we're really talking a lot about polio. And for some individuals, like these stories resonate and they realize how great of a job we've done in preventing a disease. But others are like, whatever, it's polio, it's far away. I'll give you two more examples. I'll give you a few examples that are more recent. Is children used to get brain swelling from chickenpox, believe it or
Mm.
not. This doesn't happen anymore because of the vaccine. Haemophilus influenza B, or HIB, if people see that written,
Oh.
HIB, with a B as in boy. I have mentors who tell me these stories about seeing babies unable to breathe, getting meningitis, and dying regularly from HIB. And like when they tell me these stories, like I can see their emotions. And they tell me these stories about these babies coming in the ER and there's nothing they can do. They're doing everything they can. I have never seen a case. I've been a practicing pediatrician I finished residency in 2015, so 10 years. I've never seen a case of HIB because of the vaccine. It's not that long ago. And then the most recent awful example is a measles death. The overwhelming majority of American pediatricians have never seen a case of measles or a measles death. Multiple people now have seen a case of measles. And I want to raise awareness to the most recent death. This child who died from a complication of measles called SSPE, subacute sclerosing panencephalitis. Think long-term brain disease caused by the measles virus hanging out in your body. This kid got measles when he was a baby before he was eligible for the vaccine. So this isn't about parents being like, you didn't get your kid the shot. No, this is about the community effect. And so I don't want to speculate at all about this case because I don't know the family. I don't want to talk about them as an individual or their community. But this is an example of things that we used to see a lot more often. And then once we got vaccines and we were getting these rates, we didn't see them. And now we're slowly seeing them again. We don't
Mm.
have to.
Yeah. Okay, you're teetering on the line of herd immunity. And I think a lot of people have, I think there are two camps, or this is at least what I've experienced being an online creator and having some of these discussions. I typically, you guys know, listeners know, this is not something I'm willing to take on. I'm not an expert in vaccines. That's why I'm doing it on the podcast, so I don't have to take it on myself. I have the experts on to talk about it. I just ask the questions.
I
But
love it. That's the way it should be. We ask
yeah,
questions.
look, this is so far out of my wheelhouse. I have no business commenting on vaccines. And up until this point, I have never had to make a decision for anyone else except myself on vaccines. And so I guess what I hear is there are two camps. It's either herd immunity, yes, I believe in vaccinating myself for others, or this individualistic idea of if your vaccines work, then you vaccinate yourself, and I'm going to do what's best for me. And if your vaccines work, then my vaccination status is not going to impact you because you've been vaccinated. Help us understand herd immunity and how what impact does this individualistic ideation have on herd immunity?
I just like to ask those people if they believe in drunk driver laws.
Hmm.
If I'm allowed to just do whatever I want and worry about yourself. Anyway, that's an extreme example. But we
No,
have
but
many
a
laws.
really good parallel
It's
of,
true.
we do make decisions when we live in a collective society. There is something to be said about what you do ultimately can impact the people around you.
Totally. There are also individuals who say, so what if your kid has a peanut allergy? My kid likes peanut butter sandwiches. Maybe your kid shouldn't go to the school then. And you have
Got
to
it.
really ask yourself, like, there are many society succeeds in so many ways because we collectively work together. Everyone loves to reference like primitive times and back in the day we did this and ancient cavemen ate this diet, buy my smoothie. Guess what? Since the dawn of human civilization, we've worked together. That is how we succeed. And so now moving to the concept of herd immunity, In very simple layman's terms, and again, I will acknowledge, like, I am not expert's a rare term to throw around. Like, I'm
Sure.
not going to use that term for most things. I'm not an expert with the epidemiology and with the math of herd immunity. But simply put, when we reach a certain level of immunization in a community, the actual infectious disease can no longer spread. It doesn't have more hosts, if you will, to infect. So it's a lot harder for a virus to be like, oh my gosh, okay, I got this person sick, but I'm a virus. My job is to propagate and continue to thrive, but there's no one else around for me to infect. I'm stuck. And now I'm going to die out. And that's essentially what had happened to smallpox. We don't see smallpox at all anymore because of herd immunity. That's essentially what's happened to all these diseases that no longer had people to infect. Is the rates slowly start to drop down. With certain diseases, you have a different level of how contagious they are. And we usually represent that with something called R naught, which is an R and then a little tiny zero. And that number is how many people can be infected by one person who has this contagious disease. And, famously, COVID-19 was able to infect multiple people with just one person who was infectious. But if you look at measles, measles has the ability to affect 12 to 20 people, depending, with one person who's infected. And if they have symptoms and they're around coughing, measles can also survive in the air. So think about how incredibly contagious this one disease is, which is why we want to see a 95% community vaccination rate to give the people who are not vaccinated against measles the best shot to not catching it. So when you hear people say, oh, we want to get 95% of children entering kindergarten vaccinated against those early diseases, this is the reason why. We're trying to protect everyone. We want all kids to be able to have childhood and go play sports and hang out with their friends and screw around in art class and do all those things of childhood and not worry about this. And we're really trying to protect those who have immunocompromised conditions, babies, the elderly, anyone who's vulnerable, or people who have not gotten vaccinations for whatever reason it may be.
Okay, y'all, you know how we're always on the search for clean brands that are going to be transparent with the ingredients and the things that they put in their products? Well, I finally have found one, and I've been using their protein powder for the last 6, 7 months, and I have to say, I officially love them. I do. Just Ingredients is slowly becoming my go to place for so many things that I use in my daily life because I can see exactly what they put in their products. And there's no fillers, there's nothing, that we don't want, nothing undesirable, nothing that I can't pronounce. And I'm like, what is that? They have electrolytes. I mentioned the protein powders. They have magnesium. We know how important that is in pregnancy as well. Fish oil for people who are trying to conceive. And they actually just launched pancake and muffin mix, which I'm going to snag in my next order. And I just ordered bone broth, but I haven't had a chance to try it. Super excited for that. They also have beauty products if you have been looking to switch to a clean and minimal brand. Not only do I love Just Ingredients because they're so transparent, but I love their commitment to using real ingredients and encouraging their consumers to become educated on optimal health and wellness, how they can support their bodies and their minds, and how do you actually understand the products that are in your life and where you might want to swap out different things. I'll never be a gatekeeping girly, and I will always test out products before I share them with you guys because I want to make sure that what I'm recommending is an honest recommendation and you can trust that it will be safe with you and your family. If you want to check out Just Ingredients, go to justingredients.us. So not .com, justingredients.us. And you can use the savings code Tranquility by HeHe, HeHe, Tranquility by HeHe, to save 10% off of your first order. Nothing makes me happier than to help you get healthier. And this is one of the brands that I love and trust, so I wanted to share it with you. All right, bye. And what about natural immunity? Sharing a little bit about my own life. I grew up in rural Mississippi. I grew up on a farm. My dad is a cow farmer. I went to a chickenpox party instead
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
getting the varicella vaccine. I'm a 91 baby, so I don't even know if the chickenpox vaccine was available back then, but we had chickenpox parties. Help us understand what are the risks and the benefits of natural immunity versus, I guess like vaccination immunity when it comes to certain diseases. And does it change based on the disease?
It's a great question. And first of all, like the chickenpox vaccine wasn't around until the mid 90s anyway, so you're
So
good.
there you go. That's probably why we did it.
And we have this concept of survivorship bias.
Okay.
Because if you go online right now and you go and look at these debates people are having, you'll see people say, "Oh my gosh, like all my kids got the measles, we're all fine." Remember the Brady Bunch episode when they all had
Yeah.
measles? Like people reference that all the time. And I'm like, yeah, I also know someone who used to ride a bike and snowboard without a helmet. He's fine too. I know someone, again, going back to drunk driving, like there are people who did that and they're fine. That's survivorship bias. We're trying to create overall harm reduction for the community. So you're totally right. A lot of people, when I was growing up, had chickenpox parties and they're all fine. They got, these lesions and scratches and things like that. But a small percentage of kids weren't fine. And
Hmm.
they actually went and got severely ill and they got encephalitis. Or chickenpox spread to people who were more vulnerable, the elderly, young babies. People don't hear about chickenpox anymore.
No.
And it's not just about severe illness. It's also, think about all the acute doctor visits. Think about all the ER visits. Think about all the parents who couldn't go to work, all the school days missed. Add all that together. And you not only have billions of healthcare dollars saved, you have trillions with a T, trillions of indirect savings to our economy because you no longer see this element of acute illness. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I
that
mean, it,
ripple
right?
effect of
So
yes,
yeah,
now we have
yes.
chickenpox, but
So even if you look at other ones, so like chickenpox is a great example. There are people who are like, dude, I don't need a vaccine for this. So we really want to talk about the total societal benefit. Even rotavirus. We know we didn't have a rotavirus vaccine when I was a kid. Many people, when I first started training, didn't have that vaccine either. But kids used to get severely sick from it. Missed daycare, missed school. Some kids wound up hospitalized from dehydration. Rotavirus still kills kids in other countries in the world. Yeah,
jeez.
tons of kids every year. And it's terrible. And now we don't really see it. It's
Huh.
like norovirus with an N. That thing will take out an entire family for a few days.
Yeah.
People are throwing up and have diarrhea all over the house. It'll ruin an entire cruise ship for someone.
Yeah.
And it's, do you really need to see these diseases just because people aren't actively dying at an alarming rate? No, we can create a societal benefit.
What about the RSV vaccine? So this is a really controversial one because it's new, and I think there's a lot of fear around the newness, right? And I think we still have that residual fear of COVID of, okay, we trusted you once, and a lot of people feel duped. So what do we need to know about the RSV vaccine? Because that is another really scary disease that can happen in kids, and it kills kids in our own backyard. We have a lot of deaths here in the U.S. Not necessarily a lot, but children in the US die from RSV every year. This is a newer vaccine. What do parents need to know when making that decision?
Just a great question. And you're asking the exact right questions about RSV. And it's simply put, it's like the people we're really looking at to get the RSV vaccine or the monoclonal antibody,
Okay.
which kind of gives like a vaccine protective effect because you're giving antibodies, are infants, pregnant individuals, the elderly.
Okay.
And so if you look at the elderly and you look at infants, we have a high amount of people who get severely ill, wind up in ERs, wind up in doctor visits, but also hospitalized. And so you can ask any pediatrician in the world, but especially in the country, how many kids we see every single year with RSV.
A lot.
I sometimes see kids with RSV who come into the ER. We keep them for one night, and the next morning they're doing okay. They're able to eat. They don't need any oxygen support. I'm like, great, go home, have a nice life. We see kids wind up in the ICU. We see kids who have underlying medical conditions, and a simple RSV will knock it over the edge. Perhaps they have underlying heart or lung disease, or they have cancer, or they have liver disease, and all of a sudden, the stress their body and their lungs get from RSV takes things way too far. And they're all of a sudden they're intubated in the ICU, all from RSV. And what's scary about RSV is it could be a common cold in the average person, or it could be a very minimal cold. Like you might have a little sniffle or something and not really know what you have. And then that could be devastating in somebody else. And so I cannot wait for the next generation to not know the horrors of an ICU filled with children with RSV.
That'll be a
But
polio. It'll be the time that we're all walking around being like, no, I remember what RSV did when it just ransacked our communities. And hopefully in years to come, people are like, really, is RSV that bad? And we're like, yeah, it really is like that bad.
and I want to bring this, you said, is it that bad? And I want to bring up this point too. The other component of some of these diseases, especially if you look at, let's just put COVID, influenza, and RSV into the same kind of category as we approach, quote, cold and flu season, which is a lot more complicated than just cold and flus, I'll add. And if you look at data for the amount of children who get these diseases and wind up hospitalized, and in some of these diseases, that rate of children hospitalized per thousand cases could be pretty high, such as young children under the age of 1. And then if you got children under the age of 1 who might be premature or have an underlying medical condition, that number could all of a sudden be higher.
Hmm.
So in some studies, you might see an hospitalization rate of RSV reaching like 20%, for example, in this population. So if you look at all kids, you put it all together, and let's say it winds up being, I'm going to make this number up right now, 1 to 5%. And someone says, oh my gosh, I'm not worried about that. There's a 1% chance my kid's going to get hospitalized from this disease. I'm like, okay, but we're just talking about hospitalizations. We're not even mentioning your kid getting sick and all the other things that could happen from that. But imagine if you let millions of kids get infected. All of a sudden, those numbers start to skyrocket.
Hmm.
1% is also a low number. So let's say this number, because of this certain flu strain, is higher, or because of, this specific season has a much harsher COVID strain. I'm giving examples. And you now get a healthcare system that has tons of kids who are in the ER or hospitalized because of these viruses that people once thought were not a big deal. You not only have a bunch of kids who are critically ill, you now have this massive strain on our healthcare system, economically and physically. There are not enough nurses, there are not enough doctors to deal with this. There's not enough equipment. And so pediatricians remember the winters of 2022 when we had this massive tripledemic of flu, RSV, and COVID. And oh my God, in the Bay Area, every single pediatric ICU anywhere near me was full.
Hmm.
Hospitals started to get full. On top of that, then ER started to get jam packed with these massive wait times, several hours long. So if something serious happened in a child, I'm on the phone at 2 a.m. being like, we got to find this kid an ICU bed. We're calling around trying to figure out what to do. It was horrifying. And you're not only protecting the community, but like our healthcare system can't handle this. Just so everyone knows. If you're really angry about our healthcare system, call your senator.
Yeah, there are ways to make a difference. Dr. Patel, do you feel like you feel like you have trauma from the things that you saw in COVID through 2022, 2023?
I think everyone in healthcare does to a certain degree.
Yeah.
I definitely don't have the same level of trauma as my colleagues who worked in certain ERs and had dead bodies
Mm.
every single day. I have colleagues who are working in Long Island, Queens, and the Bronx. These are ER doctors, close friends of mine, who are going home every single day and crying every
Oh,
day. They were getting, dead parents and grandparents and kids and just name it, and then having to have these conference calls, phone calls, video calls of someone saying goodbye to their grandparent. That is awful. That is PTSD for so many people. And it's not just healthcare professionals. There's so many people throughout the country who have trauma from COVID. For me, it's not only what I saw during COVID. I was going back and forth from here in New York and working in one part of the hospital that had a COVID mother baby unit. And even then, these moms who had a young baby who was COVID positive, and or moms themselves, new parents who were COVID positive, and the fear of them not knowing, is this going to be okay? We're doing our best. We didn't have a vaccine at the time. And is my baby going to be okay? And I'm like, babies are doing better. We're going to do our best. It's like that moment of uncertainty was awful. But so was the thing that really sticks out to me is also how destroyed our healthcare system was, how burned out everyone was, how strained things were, and the complete denial by some parts of the country. I remember specifically one video that went viral on Twitter, the artist formerly known as Twitter, is somebody went to a rural hospital. It was either in Kansas or Colorado, Nebraska, somewhere. And the hospital was empty. And they went by and they filmed this hospital. They're like, look, what? I thought hospitals were full. And I was like, you went to one rural hospital, and that is how you're going to make an assessment over all of healthcare. And so the fact that people were actually out there saying that COVID wasn't real, that it wasn't causing problems, that this was all fake, that death data was fake, I was number one, go and talk to any ER doctor. Number two, come shadow any one of us in a hospital. Number three, if it's so fake, why is it that every high profile person who got COVID immediately went and got treated?
Yeah. Oh man, my heart breaks for
It's
just,
awful.
yeah, it just really does. My husband is in healthcare and I have PTSD from watching him try and handle that. And it's just, it's awful. We are really lucky.
So lucky.
Some people probably would not think it was lucky, but we're very lucky. We consider ourselves lucky that a lot of our close friends and family are in healthcare. And I consider it lucky because we're pretty much never in a healthcare decision where we don't have someone to call. And I just find myself being very grateful for that, whether it be, urology or anesthesiology or pulmonary
Hmm.
or cardiology or whatever it may be. We always have someone that we are connected to that we can call for some help and for some opinions. And,
Can
being
I add
medical,
something?
yeah, of course.
Sorry, finish. I keep interrupting you. Go ahead.
Just being medical adjacent, it felt different. I didn't have the responsibilities because I'm not a medical professional, but I'm close enough to medicine and I have worked in the hospitals for a decade that I could feel what the people in my life were feeling. And it like broke me wide open, And so I have a different type of trauma than everyone who did direct patient care. And it impacted my business different. I'm a doula. We were kept out of hospitals, which was
Mhm.
its own kind of trauma. But yeah, my heart broke for the whole country. I think it was just a really bad time for everybody. But yeah, what was your question?
I was going to say, I think there is some unity into what everybody collectively went through.
Totally.
And I don't believe in alienating people unless you're outwardly trying to cause problems, I'll
Yeah, yeah.
alienate you. But even those who are vaccine hesitant or who didn't know what to do with masks, or I don't think we should ever cast them away. Like everybody together was scared and trying to figure out what to do, make the best decision. And in some ways, like we saw a lot of great humanity during COVID.
Yeah, we did.
And I never want to forget that part of the story. Like it's easy to go and bash on how the response was taken and people who denied the whole thing. But at the same time, like there were teachers who were doing what they could to make sure kids were educated. I know someone who was organizing this like community Wi-Fi setup so that kids could still do their homework. People were delivering food. There were so many amazing stories. And I hope we never forget that when we're pushed against the wall, like humans still come together. And then even from a pure science standpoint, again, Operation Warp Speed shows what happens when you have urgency, you have collective intelligence, you have data sharing. People were sharing data from all over the world, and you have funding.
Yeah.
We can do incredible things when we work together. That's not even what I wanted to mention. What I wanted to mention is you bring an important point up about resources, about disparity, like the fact that people have access to healthcare, people have, people they can call, and then so much of the country,
Hasn't.
especially pregnant women, people
Hmm.
who are going through this and are like, I live in a maternity care desert. I don't have friends and family who are working healthcare, and I have a question, like, what do I do?
Look, that was my whole reason for starting this podcast back in 2018 is, I originate from Mississippi. I know what it's like to live in a healthcare desert. I know what it's like to need a specialist and you have to drive 2.5 hours and your mom has to take off work and you have to miss school and it's a
Oh my
financial
gosh.
burden on your family. I know what that's like. I had so many people down south that were reaching out saying, I want to work with you. I want the information that you have. I desire the access of the things that you are teaching. How can I get that? And it took me a minute to realize, okay, how can I put this on a platform in a scalable way that I can get this out to people for free. And that was the whole point of this platform. And I could have never in a million years thought that it was going to grow to 300,000 followers. I could have never, ever imagined the depths that it would have gone or the corners of the earth that it would have reached or even the
It's
caliber of
amazing.
guests that I could have had on. Thank you. This is not me tooting my own horn. This is me saying I wanted a way to get this information out. And I just feel so grateful to have this platform as a free way to get this stuff out because I think so many times it is the financial access that prevents people from being able to get things. Not everybody can pay for databases that I'm very lucky we're able to afford through a business, right? Not everybody has access to take off of work to go to the specialist. And so I can't give you medical advice on here, but what I could do is I could bring you a specialist on and we could give you general information that could at least get you started on your research or at least connect you with someone in your area. We can tell you about telehealth. Maybe that's something you've never heard about, things like that. So that's how I wanted to use this platform. And in 2018, it started out as just like a labor of love of let me get some information down to my people in Mississippi. And now it is really just it's a platform where I'm able to elevate voices that need to be heard and share about topics that I think a lot of people want to know about, but they don't have the access to. And for that, it's just a really big honor. Okay, I do have a
Well,
couple
I'll
of.
toot your horn then. I'll toot your horn. Doot, doot.
Oh,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you so much. We do have a couple more questions, so I want to make sure that we get those because these are the big questions that I think run rampant on the internet, and I'd love for you to help tackle them with me. So, when we look at studies for vaccinated versus unvaccinated children, what do we see? And or do those studies exist based on pure like ethics? Is that something that we can study? And let me give you my opinion before we get
Mhm.
started. I think that in today's age, we could actually put out a call that said, if you're willing and already chosen the unvaccinated life, we would love to study your children for X amount of years. And then if you have chosen to vaccinate your children, we would love to study your children for the same amount of years. And we'd love to do a comprehensive study. And you're not withholding the vaccine from anyone. If anybody in the unvaccinated group decided at any point they wanted a vaccine, you certainly would be able to have access to it. It's not about withholding, but it's just simply saying we have these two groups. They've already chosen this lifestyle. Let's look at outcomes. Is there a study that does that? Do you think that's ethical? Are there problems with kind of my idea? Again, I'm not a scientist. I just see there are already two groups. Why aren't we looking into them?
I'll openly say that I have some ethical issues with doing a
Okay.
study like that. And the first one is I would never want to make there this potential platform for unvaccinated children or for people to be like, sure, look, we're gonna keep our children unvaccinated because there's a study now normalizing this comparison, if
Got
that
it.
makes any sense. So we do have these studies looking back on unvaccinated versus vaccinated children.
Okay.
I'm looking at many different issues. That's different because now you no longer are controlling for something in the future. You're looking back on data we already have. And
Okay.
so two kind of different study designs. So if you think about a study design where I said, okay, I'm going to give people GLP-1, like Ozempic, and I'm going to compare that to diet and exercise, and we're going to follow these people for a year and a half. You have intervention, you have control, and you're going to see if this drug makes a difference. If we were to promote an ongoing study, vaccinated versus unvaccinated, you have a massive ethical issue because some of those kids in the unvaccinated arm could get extremely sick and or die. This is why the conversation of having a new vaccine being tested against placebo is
Mm-hmm.
so tricky. Because let's say some new influenza strain comes out and it's rapid disease. Would you really want to say, and I want people to actually think about this rather than having a knee jerk reaction. Do you really want to create a study that compares this new vaccine of influenza versus no vaccine? Or can we compare the new vaccine versus the one that we already had that we know is safe? So that's an ethical issue I have with that type of study. But to your question, we do have a lot of studies looking throughout the world, looking at vaccinated versus unvaccinated in autism, in certain chronic illnesses, and especially in the incidence of getting the disease that we're talking about.
All
And
retrospective, though.
retrospective, yes,
Okay.
retrospective is the term. And one thing I want to caution people about is you will see headlines, you will see people, especially politicians, say, hey, this one study found a higher rate of, call it autism, or this problem in this specific study. And you can actually go and mess with the data on any study you want. You can change the age you're looking at. You can change the timing of how long you're looking. You can remove certain variables to find your what result you're looking for. And this is why studies get retracted. This is why there's always these issues. And by the time that's happened, the damage has been done. And so if I look at a study, for example, and I say, I'm only going to look at kids in California at the age of 18 to 24 months in a vaccinated population. And I'm going to look at that incidence of autism diagnosis versus a rural community where nobody got vaccines. You are probably not going to get a vaccine, an autism diagnosis, if you don't have a developmental pediatrician to give you a diagnosis. But they coincidentally happen to not be vaccinated. Whereas in California, in certain parts of the country where people have access, if you, it doesn't matter what your early symptom is. If you have any signs of autism, you're getting into a doctor, hopefully, you can get a diagnosis. So you would see a different rate of autism, but it would have nothing to do with the actual vaccine. It would have everything to do with the study design. So that's where this all gets so extremely tricky. People look at Andrew Wakefield, if you know his name. I said Andrew Wakefield, not doctor, because he's lost his doctorate. I had to make sure people knew that. But he had this study. He had this study in 1998. And that study wound up being this very important paper in the whole ongoing discussion about whether or not vaccines cause autism. But for some reason, people don't like to pay attention to the fact that he only looked at 12 children. It was not controlled by any means. He paid these kids for their blood samples. There were major flaws in how the study was designed, and it was retracted.
Was retracted. That's the main thing is like we did end
It
up going
was
back and
such,
saying this was a really bad study.
we live in a weird time where, and again, I don't want to say that this is not the majority of parents. There's a small group of people, especially on the internet, where if we talked about the effectiveness of some intervention, vitamin K, there's a great example. That's not a vaccine, the injection after birth. Someone would say, hey, I need to know it's safe. And if you're going to tell me it's safe, I want to see a large, randomized, controlled trial, millions of children studied. I need to know. But the reason I don't trust it is because I saw this one Facebook message from my friend's cousin's uncle. You are not doing the same type of analysis for pro and con.
That's hard. And it's rampant. It's everywhere.
I don't blame parents. I don't blame parents. It's hard.
Totally. It is really hard and it is genuinely scary. I opened up this episode saying I came into this with so much confidence. I said, I know what I'm doing. This is going to be my choice. And the closer we get to having this baby, I find myself not confused. I still feel very confident, but I relate more to the confusion more than ever. I can see why if you didn't have a partner in healthcare, if you don't have a network like I'm super blessed with, if you didn't have the confidence, or I have a master's degree that has enabled me to understand studies. I can look at a study and I can tell you the confidence interval. I can tell you whether the methodology was good. I can tell you whether their results actually are pretty honest or did they cherry pick some things. Not everybody has that privilege, and I am, again, I know that's a privilege and I feel very blessed with that. I can understand wholeheartedly why people
Totally.
get very confused on this and why it's so scary. You're making a decision that once you make it, you can't take it back. It's not like we can take that injection out of your baby. We can't uninoculate them for varicella once we've given it to
Yes.
them. And so if you ever feel like, oh my gosh, I made the wrong decision, that is something that you have to live with. But that's on both sides, right? If your
It's on both
baby is
sides.
unvaccinated and then they get sick, you have to live with that as well.
You do. And that's why that open dialogue is so important. And, I know that famous phrase, like, talk to your doctor if you have a question about X, Y, and Z. That's actually a statement of privilege.
Yeah.
Millions of people don't have health insurance or don't
Yeah.
have time to go and talk to a doctor. But talking to a healthcare professional, or at least going online and getting information from a reputable source.
Yes.
So whether that is a national health agency, a nonprofit, a .org, or a healthcare professional who is not trying to sell you some crap, or an unregulated supplement, like, to make sure you're getting information from a good source. But what I also want to make sure I acknowledge, and on the same page as you, is that people should not feel ashamed. Parents should not feel like they're in some weird category because they have vaccine questions.
Yeah.
And I say this so wholeheartedly, but we cannot keep grouping vaccine hesitancy with anti-vaccine. They're not the same. There's so many people who are vaccine hesitant, and that's okay, because look at it. You're like getting your information and you just are just trying to suss it all out. And I'll give people a great analogy right here. Look, HeHe, this is an iPhone, right? Like, I'm an Android kid. That is my jam.
Okay.
Everyone listening can make fun of me all day long. I'm an Android kid. I have an iPhone. When it was time for me to finally convert and buy an iPhone, it took me like 6 weeks of research and going online, and I was reading these debates, and I was like, what about this processor and this screen, and arguing. Then I went into this AT&T store, and this guy was like, dude, pick one.
Just get
And I,
a
and I think about Android versus iPhone and how I was like looking at all these pieces of evidence. And I look at that in a really funny example to what some parents are trying to go through when it comes to vaccine questions. And they're just like, everywhere I go online, I'm seeing something different. Can you just tell it to me straight? So I really hope that, especially now more than ever, we're at a place where we can just have straight, real, honest dialogue and a little bit more empathy.
I do think that those two things right there are the answer to rebuilding the healthcare, the gap that exists between patients and providers in our healthcare system that has been corroded over the last couple of years. And I really, for any healthcare professionals out there that are listening, you guys have heard me say this a million times. The worst thing you can do for your patients, you guys, is meet them with a brick wall and try and force them into something. This open dialogue and meeting them where they're at and saying, I understand your hesitancy. I want to commend you on asking these hard questions. You're safe here. Let's have an honest conversation. And then at the end of the day, whatever you decide, I'm going to support you on that. That is my job. But I do want you to be able to come to me and feel safe. Worst
Mhm.
thing you can do is belittle a patient or tell them they have to do something or threaten to dismiss them as a patient because they're not doing what you're telling them. You're going to further corrode that trust. You're going to push them so far out of the healthcare system. They are never going to trust this system again. They're never going to come back. They are going to have virtually nobody to care for them. And that's not my goal. That's not your goal. That's no one in healthcare's goal. We want people to be able to rely on our healthcare system. And unfortunately, we're in a place right now where people don't do that, but we can definitely repair that. And so I'm begging you, please meet people with an open conversation and say, I'm willing to have these kind of hard and dirty conversations with you. I want you to ask the questions that a lot of people are uncomfortable with. I'm here to hear you out and I'm here to give you the data that I have access to.
I love that. I think you nailed it. It's not belittling people, it's realizing that people are doing the best with the information they have.
Totally.
And to my fellow doctors out there who are frustrated by all the online wellness influencers selling stuff, look at their approach. They welcome everyone. They will attempt to treat any condition under the sun by selling you a product. But it's one thing that they do that, dare I say, I want to learn anything from them, is that they don't turn anyone away. It's not a good thing because you could go to them and be like, hey, I think I have cancer. And they're like, here's this pill that
Here's
is
some
not,
lemon juice. It will
here's
work
lemon juice.
miraculously.
It'll work. But there's an, there, here, the point is that they're listening and there's an optimism.
Yeah.
They give people hope. And if we can't give people hope because we can't treat or cure their condition or we don't know, we can be honest about that too.
Yep.
So to have that, I'll give you an example. And I don't even know how we're doing with time, but we also have to have that approach when people are sharing things that they see online and we're rebuttaling these memes, these comments, for example, because every now and then I'll see someone say, like, how could you ever believe this statistic? It's so stupid. And someone's like, well, I'm sorry. Like, I'm not health literate. Like, I saw this stat and it scared me. So I shared it. And so I want everyone to be a little bit more aware of the misinformation out there, to not share things too quickly, to ask questions. And if you're making a video rejecting these claims, to approach it with a little bit more empathy. I know everybody wants an example. I'll give you an example. There, there was this meme that was shared millions of times. I still see it on my algorithm. And it's this B-roll clip. And it says the reason Japan has such a low infant mortality rate is because they don't mandate childhood vaccines. And I cannot tell you how many people have sent me this meme. And everyone's, oh my God, I told you, like, this is such a bad thing. And I was like, everyone relax. First of all, Japan has an extremely high vaccination rate.
Okay.
So that already debunks this whole thing. They have a very high vaccination rate. And on top of that, when you talk about infant mortality, you're talking about the hepatitis B vaccine because all the other vaccines listed, you're not going to get in infancy. You're going to get like all those later on. But yes, so you're talking about 2, 4, 6 months, those vaccines. We're talking about vaccines that have been around for an extremely long time and that we know are safe and effective. But also, infant mortality somehow is not being talked about in this country at all, even though it involves everything from access and social determinants of health and healthcare funding and maternity care deserts and people being able to get medical care when they need it conditions that may cause prematurity, low birth weight, conditions that affect pregnant individuals that make them higher risk. All these topics have all of a sudden got thrown out the window. And that's how we have to look at these memes and realize, oh my God, they are reprogramming people to be scared and then to ignore all these massive underlying issues that are just being ignored. I don't even know where I'm going with this anymore, but this is all a more complex topic than what is painted out to be by politicians and online.
Yeah, well, I mean, you bring up a good point. Being from Mississippi, Mississippi just declared a state of emergency for their infant
Yep.
mortality rate. Talk to us about what do we need to know about our infant mortality rate in this country?
It's several times higher
It's
than
bad.
it's bad. Yeah. And it's awful to look at our infant mortality rate and compare it to other developed countries. We have the highest infant mortality rate. And then in some parts of the country, especially, Mississippi and some other resource poor areas, you have a high infant mortality rate, a high maternal mortality rate. Then you have a high level of chronic illness, a high level of obesity, and you put all these together. And you have people out there saying, hey, it's because of this one thing. Or what we need to do is sell them this one product or fix this one food supply. When in reality, you have to look at all these factors. Simply look at maternity care deserts and look at the time it takes to go and get to an OB or get to a hospital if you need it versus if you live in a city. Like that's a massive issue. Or look at all these conditions out there that may cause low birth weight. And if we're addressing them, look at factors related to maternal mental health and to making sure people have the support they need. It's all missing and it all contributes to infant mortality. Yet I don't see anyone in politics on the national stage taking this on and
Hmm.
saying, hey, it's infant mortality is more than just life or death. It's about creating the best possible environment for the next generation and to support parents, both parents.
Hmm.
If there are both parents, if there's 19 parents or one parent, supporting the unit raising this little human.
Wow. Should we run for president and vice president?
I
Should
mean,
we
it would
run?
dig up my Facebook photos from college and I would get kicked out of the campaign like right now.
And they'd be like, not him. He cannot
Yeah,
run
but
our
like
country.
people really need to look at the difference between being pregnant in a city and having like resources and money and access and
Yeah.
being able to set up your home and your support squad and getting a pediatrician and all this stuff early versus what people are doing resource poor areas, but also in other countries and throughout time. And anytime you see someone saying, hey, back in the day, kids did not get these vaccines and they did fine. I was like, did they do fine? Because
Mm.
infant mortality rates used to be sky high.
Yeah.
Not every child was surviving even the first month.
Yeah.
In some civilizations throughout history, you were lucky to make it to one.
Gosh, that's horrible. Okay, so when compared to other countries and we're doing so bad, you don't think there's one thing that is contributing to that. It's like our overall structure.
I think it's our overall structure. And it's I mean I didn't come here for with like my policy data about what specific countries have, but it's like you could look at these countries and ask yourselves questions about their access to healthcare.
Yeah.
These countries all have some form of universal healthcare. We're the only one.
Mm.
We're the only country where if you have a situation, you have to sit down and think, hold on, if I go to the ER, will I be able to afford rent? And you all of a sudden are doing what you can to not go. That's a terrible
Yeah.
situation to be in.
Yeah.
So if you, and to be fair, some other countries we compare ourselves to are a lot smaller. They have a different type of infrastructure to protect. But yeah, you look at mental health services, look at maternity care services, healthcare, reimbursement, all these things, and it all factors together. As does lifestyle, getting outside, eating, whole food based meals, actually having access to food. Because again, another issue we don't talk about, but all of it together.
Totally. Okay. My last question before we wrap up is a big one. It is the one that I think a lot of people are very concerned about, rightfully. Again, all of your concerns are very valid. Adjuvants, aluminum, thimerosal, things that are in our vaccines that make people very scared. And if you are not familiar with why they're in there and or things like thimerosal really aren't in a lot of our vaccines anymore, and I think people don't recognize that. But what do we need to know about adjuvants and the way that it interacts with our body and why we need it? So we've got to have things that are shelf stable, you guys. We have to have things that can be produced and then last on a shelf so that we can divvy them out to the American people and children. But what do families need to know about aluminum? Because you do see these scary things online that are like, oh my gosh, X amount by the CDC, and then you have a one vaccine and it's 25,000 times that amount. So help us understand adjuvants, specifically aluminum, thimerosal, anything else that you
Mhm,
commonly
mhm.
hear parents be very afraid of.
And I understand the questions about these.
Yeah,
Like some of these ingredients you might attribute to, a poisoning case. You're like, oh my gosh, formaldehyde.
for
That's super
sure.
scary. And, aluminum, I've heard of aluminum toxicity. So the reality is that adjuvant, for my Spanish speakers out there, ayudar, adjuvant comes from the Latin word for to help. And so adjuvants in general are going to help with the delivery of the vaccines and boosting how long that they are stable for in the body. So that means that you're going to get a better response. And what that then means is that you actually need less antigen or less of that kind of immune stimulating property of the vaccine. And you mentioned shelf life, so they're going to be sterile. So there's not as much junk that's going to be in them. So it basically makes your vaccines a lot more efficient. Now, in the old days, before we had all these adjuvants, vaccines were not as safe or
Hmm.
as effective.
Oh,
And so the use of adjuvants has actually greatly improved our vaccine delivery and make vaccines safer, less doses, smaller dose, better response. Now, if we go through them individually, what I would recommend for every parent to do is to ask open-ended questions about what these are, why do we need them, and to not be afraid of them necessarily. And for example, aluminum, big one. And I will see people online saying, "Oh my God, aluminum is poison. Look at this study in rats. And would you want to give your kid aluminum?" And what I say to that is, first of all, regarding the study in rats, usually those studies are, aside from not being in a human, they're giving a really high amount of aluminum. Also, aluminum is all over our planet. You are getting aluminum from the soil, from food, from breast milk. And so a happy breast milk fed baby is going to get more aluminum from every single vaccine combined. Now, someone might say to me, hey, that vaccine goes in your blood. And I said, yes, some of the breast milk aluminum gets absorbed in your blood also. But guess what? Our bodies have a very efficient kidney and liver system that gets rid of these things in this small dose. But again, it is good to ask. Formaldehyde is an interesting one. It's like some vaccines have formaldehyde in them. It helps, again, keep them sterile. And someone might say to me, hey, formaldehyde is toxic. I saw it on this bottle and I think it's an embalming fluid. What's up? We can't have formaldehyde in our bodies. And I'll say, every single baby on planet Earth has a small amount of formaldehyde already flowing throughout their system from DNA metabolism.
hmm.
And then all of a sudden you're like, wait, what? And I'm like, it's okay. It's a really small amount. So again, it's about demystifying these terms, which rightfully do seem extremely scary. I'm glad you brought up thimerosal. Is when thimerosal was recently removed from flu vaccines by ACIP. Oh my God. The online community was like, how dare you ever put thimerosal on our vaccines? Finally, someone is giving us thimerosal free flu shots. Oh my gosh, pediatricians. And I was like, you guys, we talked about this 20 years ago. So 20 years ago, thimerosal was questioned. Researchers already found that there was no link between thimerosal and autism.
Okay.
But out of an abundance of caution and in response to these concerns, thimerosal was removed from virtually all flu shots. So the overwhelming majority of people listening have not gotten a thimerosal flu shot. In the United States, about 4% of flu shots actually have thimerosal in them. And that's usually in a situation where you don't have resources and you need to batch a bunch of flu shots together. So I'm like, what do you guys, okay, congratulations. You removed thimerosal from 4% of flu shots. But you created this campaign of fear around vaccine ingredients. So by making this move to remove one ingredient, you've now gotten all these people questioning every single ingredient. And that's how it works. That's how it happens. That's why
Um,
making sure you're getting good information, you're pushing back is so important. And even when people talk about mercury, I ask, are you talking about methyl mercury or ethyl mercury?
and they
Because
don't
it's
know a lot of
something.
times.
What's that?
They don't know a lot of times.
Yeah, and and someone might say, "Oh my God, mercury poisoning from this fish is like such a big deal, and it builds up in your kidneys." And I was like, "That's methyl mercury with an M, not ethyl with an E." And there is a big difference.
They're different.
But
Yeah.
again, this is so tricky. I can't imagine being, a parent right now who does not work in healthcare or in science and is just like online trying to figure out what to do.
It's terrifying. Yeah, and so overwhelming. Oh my gosh. Dr. Patel, this conversation has been so good. And I genuinely think this is the conversation that so many people are desiring and yearning for, but they just don't have a place to have it. They don't have someone that they can trust to talk about this. Maybe they don't have a healthcare practitioner, or maybe they do have a provider, but they are not feeling heard by their provider. So I genuinely, from the
I
bottom of my
appreciate you.
heart, really want to thank you for being here. If people wanted to connect with you, learn from you, listen more to you, share a story with you, how can they do that?
I have segments on ABC News. The segment's called Patel It Like It Is. I
Yep.
know. Fun name. And you can find those online on YouTube or on ABC News Live. But on my Instagram at Alok Patel MD, please come to me with your DMs and send me questions and comment. And don't be afraid of commenting something that might seem, aggressive. I'm good with it. Come be open with these questions. I think it's so important that we talk about this. Because
Yeah.
what happens when we aren't sharing questions, we let misinformation spread, and then all of a sudden people make bad decisions. They don't mean to, and I hope everyone out there who's getting prepared to have a new baby, including you, feels
Woo!
empowered and excited, and then is able to ask those questions and has that loving relationship with whoever is helping them, whoever is in their corner for raising a new kid. And please all get your vitamin K shots, by the way, for your babies. Just gonna say that. Anytime I see a baby who has a brain bleed or an intestinal bleed because they weren't given the vitamin K shot, I'm like, that is a failure in communication.
Because it was preventable.
It was so preventable.
Mm,
I virtually never see these these very low vitamin K brain bleeds or bleeds in kids who got the shot. I almost never
mm,
do.
yeah.
And again, that is a pure failure in communication.
Thank you so much for being here, you guys.
Sorry on that dark note. Sorry on that
No,
dark note,
no,
but
not at all. I appreciate it. And again, I have this podcast because I want people to hear varying opinions. I want to have on the experts that I just don't have the capacity to fill your shoes. I don't have the knowledge. It's not my background. It's way out of my wheelhouse. And you guys, I hope that Dr. Patel restored some of your trust in the healthcare system. I know that we are not all blessed with having a provider that is as human and as transparent as open as he is, but I hope that by hearing what Dr. Alok said, you can understand that they do exist, and that if you're not feeling heard by your healthcare provider, seek out someone new if you have that opportunity. But like we've talked about, it's not always an option for everyone depending on where you live. And please rest assured that people like Dr. Alok and I are working hard to close those gaps. We want to see a country that doesn't have any sort of desert in anything, whether that be access or maternity care or education or resources or really anything. I want you to know that there are so many people working behind the scenes to improve our healthcare and to make it what you want it to be, and to make it a place where you can come back and you can trust it again. All right, you guys, I will see you in the next episode. Be sure to follow Dr. Patel on social media. And you can find me at Tranquility by HeHe and at the.birth.lounge. Until next time, head to your app store and download the Birth Lounge app for evidence-based childbirth education and data-driven postpartum support delivered straight to your phone. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I love hanging out with you, and it is an honor to be your go-to gal when it comes to preparing for your baby. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review and tell others why they should be listening to the Birth Lounge podcast too. You deserve to have a birth that you love with a provider that values your autonomy and respects informed consent without all the trauma that you so commonly hear about on social media. New episodes air every Wednesday and Friday. Hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. I'm HeHe, and this is the Birth Lounge Podcast.